Hi, David.
Hello, Bob.
How you doing?
I am anxious.
Anxious about what, David? Wait, first let me say that you're David Korn, the famous Washington bureau chief of Mother Jones. Now tell us, what are you anxious about?
Well, wait a second. And former co-star of the Blogging Heads...
Pinkercorn,
reoccurring feature.
And you know, you could be co-star any day. Say the word. We'll set you up, man. It's not like Jim's got anything better to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So why am I anxious?
Why are you anxious?
Well, Bob, glad you asked. I have a new book out.
Do you really? Is it called Showdown?
Yes. And you've been in this position before, where you spend a long time working on a book, and then comes the week or the day that you're putting it out, and you just have no idea what's going to happen. And you do feel like stopping everybody you meet on the street and grabbing them by the lapel and saying, I have a book! You might like it. You should buy it.
It turns you into a pathetic person, doesn't it?
Yes, quite so. I think it's worse than being the parent at a bar mitzvah.
Much worse.
Much worse. Because you would grovel, you would do anything to get any smidgen of attention.
You would even be willing to reserve some time for Blogging Heads TV in a situation like that, wouldn't you?
You think it would help?
No, but that's how desperate you are.
Well, it's certainly in the won't hurt category. No, I'm happy to be back in the fields of Blogging Heads TV.
And the subtitle is The Inside Story of How Obama Fought Back Against Boehner, Cantor, and the Tea Party. So
that is correct.
This actually is, regardless of how many books we sell on the show, this is a great service for you, because we're taping this before publication date by about a week. So you haven't done your Charlie Rose or whatever they line up for you, so this can be practice for you.
Yes.
Why do you laugh?
Yes, this is AAA ball before I get it.
Exactly.
That's great.
I'm not ashamed of that. AAA is good.
People make a lot of money in AAA ball.
There's a lot of athletic talent, regardless of whether they get quite the celebrity that they deserve. Okay, so I'm going to act like Charlie Rose. I'm going to help you out here. I'm going to play Charlie Rose, okay?
Okay, let me turn down the lights here.
Yeah, could we get some black backdrop, please?
Yes.
And a little more oak in this table, possibly? A little less plywood? So I'm setting the book down on my table, and I'm gonna put my hand down on it emphatically, and I'm going to say, why did you write this book?
The reason I wrote the book was because I had the chance to write this book, which may strike you as a bit of an oblique answer. But I was at the White House. This would be in December of 2010. And talking to people there about a bunch of things, but at that point the tax cut compromise was the big issue of the day. And now, of course, people remember, even our internet age, you can remember back 14 months or so, 16 months, that there was a big fight over Obama's decision to not fight against the 2-year extension of the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy, and instead get all these other tax breaks and continuation of tax breaks that are in the stimulus package that would help middle class and low-income families, what was in essence a second stimulus. And it caused a tremendous row on the Democratic side and amongst some liberal antagonists who pummeled the president.
That included me, by the way.
Okay,
go ahead.
Might have included you. I mean, we certainly talked about it a lot in the Blogging Heads blogosphere. And at the time, the way that the White House was putting it, to me and to others, it was partly spin, but it also had the benefit of, I think, of being true, is that they were saying, listen, the president here has a responsibility to millions of Americans, many of whom didn't vote for him, who will be losing their unemployment benefits, which are part of the deal at the end of the month, and who will see their tax bills go up, by up to $3,000 if all the Bush tax cuts for the middle class are not extended. And that we run the risk, this is what Larry Summers was particularly saying, of having a shock to the fragile economy at the time if taxes go up come January 1st. And yes, the president would love to have a political fight and would love to say no to the Republicans and try to, have a game of chicken with them. But they also thought at the White House that Democrats on the Hill, particularly the Senate side, would not necessarily stand with them, and they were about to lose control of the House to John Boehner and the Tea Partiers in a couple weeks' time. So if nothing was passed within 3 weeks, whatever would happen in January, February, would likely be worse than anything Obama could negotiate at that time. So, in having these conversations with some very senior White House people, I was just struck by some themes, such as the conflicting ideas of being a party leader, of fighting for political positions, versus the responsibility of governing. Nothing that's that you, Bob Wright, have not thought of before. But I realized the tax fight controversy to me seemed to really embody some of these cross-cutting currents in American politics when you have the responsibility to do politics and to govern.
Yeah.
And I became sympathetic to the White House position on the tax cut fight, but it just got me thinking in bigger terms about how can Barack Obama govern, when you lose the House, when you have a pretty united Republican Party, and a Democratic Party that often is at odds with itself. And you have a very divisive political culture that seemed at the moment to be getting even more divisive.
So is this book fundamentally a defense of Obama, in particular against what you might call the idealistic left?
No, I wouldn't say that. But to finish up this one little long-winded story, I talked to some. It gave me the idea to sort of write a book which would be, and this answers your second question as well, not a defense of Barack Obama, but more of an explanation. And I talked to some folks at the White House. I said, I have an idea for a book that would follow this year coming up, and that would include the lame duck session after the midterm shellacking, and would sort of give the White House perspective, not uncritically, not without analysis, but would be sort of, I'd want to explain maybe to those idealistic liberals who were disillusioned, but also to people in the middle and people on the other side who might, decide to read a book about Obama rather than wave a fist at him, to sort of show how he thinks and how the people around him think about what they're doing in terms of politics and in terms of policy. And I was able to get interviews with people at the White House, but also talking to people who left the White House, people who worked with the White House on the Hill, Democrats and Republicans, people in Obama's inner circle who are not working in the White House, to sort of explain what was going on behind the scenes as Obama entered this very difficult period that was really the transition period to what we're now, the 2012 campaign for his reelection.
So for this year, you had special access and the knowledge that you were going to use this access to put together a book, and the White House had that understanding as well.
Well, special access sounds maybe more special than it is or was. They gave me they allowed me to interview people at the White House, not as extensively as I would have liked, but with enough interviews that I could actually do the book, and it was. As often happens in these cases, these interviews were for the purpose of writing the book, not for reporting, doing stories from Mother Jones or talking on blogging heads or going on MSNBC while I'm doing this. So those are the deals that often get cut with the White House or with other people here in Washington.
In other words, this isn't going to show up tomorrow, what we're telling you.
Yes, it's not going to show up tomorrow. And I found it's interesting. I don't think this is all unique to the White House. But often I was talking to people about what had happened weeks or months, previously. So, for instance, throughout a lot of the debt ceiling tussle, I was talking to people about what happened during the budget fight. And I think it's just human nature, but also when something is resolved, people are more, candid is not the right word, but they're just more open. They saw how things came out, and they were more willing to talk about things. About what they were thinking, what their strategy was, what they were hoping for, what they didn't get, all those other things, and to evaluate what they did, which is almost impossible to get at the in the real time. So it was. I felt like I was always a little bit in a time warp. While people were breathing hot and heavy over the let's say Libya, I was talking to them about Egypt. And then, a few weeks would go by, and then I'd catch up to Libya. And people had time to reflect and to think about what had happened, and weren't caught up in the twist and turn of the moment. And I think that made people more comfortable talking about things too, because, again, they had known, they knew at that point how it had ended, or at least how that chapter of that episode had ended, and they could sort of figure out what they thought about it and share their reflections.
Okay. So you said it's not per se a defense of Obama against the idealistic left, but it is an argument, isn't it, that given the political constraints he faced, he did pretty well. Is that not a message you're conveying?
I would say, that the book concludes that, well, let's just start. The lame duck session, I thought was marvelous, and Obama achieved more than anybody could have expected over tremendous odds, and he did so by being rather savvy on all these different things, whether it was START treaty or Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the tax cut deal. And I go into all those machinations and the cleverness that he and the people around him, including Joe Biden and others, engaged in to get those very significant policy wins. 2011, he didn't achieve really any policy victories because he had a hostile House to contend with that wouldn't pass anything. But I do believe that by the end of the year, and I think the months since then have shown this, he achieved his strategic aims in terms of setting up the 2012 Titanic campaign, which is as a clash of values and visions, which is really what their aim was as soon as the lame duck session ended. I think the president, people around him realized that the coming year would not be a year of legislating on Capitol Hill the way the first 2 years had been.
Be a year of framing.
It would be a year of framing, of messaging, doing a lot of things that he'd been accused of not paying attention to in the first 2 years, their defense being they were too busy governing. Now, that said, they ended up, I think, not always winning those framing messaging wars on the budget fight and the debt ceiling at different points of those fights. But I think at the end, when the dust settled and they came out with the jobs bill and then ended up with the payroll tax cut fight at the end of last year, I think the evidence is overwhelming just by looking at polling that the president ended up in a much better space than did the House Republicans, and which I think has had some sort of contagion effect on the Republican candidates, including Mitt Romney.
So what is the frame he has, to some extent, successfully established heading toward an election?
Well, to begin with, I'm not a crazy Tea Party Republican. And I mean, just if you remember coming, at the beginning of January 2011, the Tea Party had all the momentum, the political momentum, the vigor, the vigor, and that's where the juice was in town. And the president ended up on all fronts, on budget priorities, on how to deal with the deficit, on who cares more about the economy and about you, and who can do better on the economy, on all these sort of public opinion indicators. By the end of the year, he was doing much better than the Republicans with a message of, yes, we must have some fiscal responsibility, some deficit reduction, and liberals can argue whether he went too far on that. But at the same time, I believe in shared sacrifice. I believe in having government involvement and government proactive activity to get the economy into a better place for now and for the decades ahead. So so the winning the future argument, which I don't think worked so much as a rhetorical device. If you go back to the State of the Union address in 2011, I think it kind of fell flat rhetorically. But the essence of that message was we have to work together communally using the government, which is how we come together as a country, to prepare for the future. And then once the debt ceiling fight was done and the job numbers were getting worse over the spring and the summer, connected to that was we need to do something now. That's sort of we can't wait message component. And I think doing all that and spending weeks and months after the debt ceiling bill pushing for jobs now and down the road, and pushing for a deficit reduction program that still maintained what he calls investment, what Republicans call wasteful government spending, ended up giving him a pretty integrated set of values to talk about, and an overarching vision that is more appealing, at least it seems at this moment in time, than what the Republicans have been offering with the government is the problem. The only thing we have to do is get rid of government and give us more freedom, liberty, yada, yada, yada. So I think, he managed to go through the budget fight and the debt ceiling fight, trying to tether it to these values with with limited success there. But then when he pivoted to jobs in the aftermath of the budget, the debt ceiling debacle, and managed to gain the upper ground.
And you think that the framing success you say he's had has more to do with his skill than with Republican ineptness or tone deafness? I mean,
I think it's both. I think he's been blessed by his enemies. But I do know for a fact that that going into the first Tea Party year, that Obama himself believed that the Tea Party types and that who were in control, not John Boehner, would provide him and his side an opening. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was kind of almost counting on it. Mm-hmm. That they would overreach, that they'd be talking about getting rid of Medicare and Social Security, that they would have nothing convincing to say about jobs. I don't think any of us actually calculated that they would also go off the cliff on some of the social conservative issues and revive the culture wars. But
what specifically? You mean gay marriage or contraception or
abortion? I mean,
recent,
if you people have forgotten, about a year ago, we at Mother Jones, got tremendous traffic covering this. Some of the very first bills that the Republicans, put forward seriously, were about limiting or abortion, changing the definition of rape, so that women would have a harder time getting abortion, in under that exemption. Mm-hmm. So and doing things like that. So they came right in, and of course the budget fight over the 2011 budget almost fell apart on the Planned Parenthood funding, which was about abortion. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the president and the people around him envisioned that, but they did envision Tea Party excess and Boehner having a hard time, or being pulled to the right.
But did he envision a blessing as big as Paul Ryan's plan to gut entitlements that older people in particular kind of cherished?
I'm glad you asked, because Chapter 6, I think it's Chapter 6, is called The Strategy. And after the lame duck session was over, they started having strategic meetings at the White House, actually sort of even coming in December of 2010, about how to proceed. And there were sort of a couple big decisions. One big decision was in the State of the Union and in their budget that they would put forward at the beginning of the year, how far to go down the deficit reduction road. And part of that involved the Ryan budget. And they made a calculated decision. When you put out your budget in February, this, other people may not, but that's the month that the White House puts out its budget, and everyone waits to see what they're going to do. And this year it was all about how much deficit reduction that they're going to put in it. They made a calculated decision not to do a lot. They knew that the deficit poobahs of Washington, the Washington Post op-ed page, and that the Republicans and everybody else would sort of attack them viciously for not doing enough. But the reason they didn't do that was they wanted the Republicans to go first. Mm-hmm. This is negotiations 101. They wanted Ryan's plan out there. They were happy to cede him several weeks of being the adult in the room, as Washingtonians often put it, because he had telegraphed his budget. He had prior to putting it out in April, or March, whenever he'd put it out, months earlier, he'd put out his blueprint, his own roadmap for our budget, which included getting rid of of guaranteed Medicare benefit. So the White House was counting on that being part of the actual budget that would be voted on by Republicans. So yes, they kind of laid low. They took a lot of arrows, took a lot of guff, knowing that
from Ryan deficit hawks, you mean?
From deficit hawks, even from some within their own party. And from Republicans said, listen, the president's not leading on this issue. And at the same time, they took fire from their progressive allies because it gets complicated. But there was the fight over the 2012 budget plan, but there was also the fight over the 2011 budget, which ran out in March, and had it, and the Republicans wanted to come in and cut at first the Tea Partiers $100 billion out of that, and they eventually did $61 billion, and they put in all these cuts that would, devastate the EPA and programs for low-income Americans and such. And the White House did not sort of run to the barricades about that. That's what they had, that negotiation that led almost to the government shutdown. And at the time, their progressive allies were tearing their hair out, saying, this is the most regressive, conservative, anti-government, budget initiative we've seen. We have to say more and do more. But they didn't want to get trapped in a big fight there. They were happy to negotiate that out, have Jack Lew do that and prevent a government shutdown, and really save their fire for this big fight after Ryan, with the Ryan budget and the debt ceiling. So they were very, if you read David Plouffe's book about the campaign, this guy is nothing if he's not a guy who comes up with a strategy, sticks to it, to the tactical elements of the strategy, and just keeps plowing ahead. And that's really what they did at the beginning of the year, and I think, my estimation...
Wait, you're saying Plouffe is like that, or Obama's like that?
Plouffe is like that, but I think it suits Obama's temperament. And I think, my estimation is at the end of the year, that strategy ended up working for them. And what impressed me, and one of the things that... You may ask me, Bob...
I may. In fact, why don't we just assume I did? Why don't you tell me what we're assuming
Anything surprise you while you were doing this book? Did you learn anything that you didn't know before?
David, one thing I've wondered is whether you were surprised by anything in the course of, researching this book.
It wasn't, I would say, a major surprise. One thing that struck me was, in looking and talking to people and looking at the decision-making that Barack Obama went through, this guy is really patient. He really avoids a lot of the short-term up and downs. Mm-hmm. I mean, he'd be a great, I think, financial investment advisor, because he's really thinking, and it's in foreign policy, it's political, I think
he doesn't get caught up in the moment.
He really doesn't, and
is that a temperamental thing? That's just the way he is.
I think it's temperamental. I also think, a lot of people, I talked to a lot of people around him, who try to explain him, and of course these are people who tend to like him and want to make him come out sounding good, but they really talk about him being supremely confident in his core, and not that he's arrogant with the people around him, but he sort of comes up with what he thinks is the best idea, the best course, in conjunction and in consultation with others, and just sort of has confidence in the decisions and in their ability, meaning his ability, to get to that point. Mm-hmm. I think he's, as he said publicly at a press conference after the tax cut deal, he says, I have my North Stars, and I may have to tack back and forth to get to them, but I know where I'm going. And I think he does, and people can argue about the positioning of his North Stars, but I think temperamentally and as just a leadership quality, he has that. So, so when everybody else is saying, this isn't working, do this, do that, and when they, us plugging heads on cable TV are saying, the Obama administration is in the tubes, this tax cut deal is going to ruin it, or, the debt ceiling, he's lost all credibility. He is able to kind of rise above that, and I don't mean that sort of in a sort of rise above it, maybe too elevated or lofty a term. He's able to sort of put it aside and sort of continue with his own to-do list. And it strikes, I was thinking about that the other day when I was watching Game Change, which I actually thought was a pretty damn good movie and well-made, well-written, well-directed. But there's a great scene in which the Steve Schmidt character, played by Woody Harrelson, is talking to John McCain, played by Ed Harris. And McCain is all upset about the media not liking him anymore because they loved him in 2000, don't like him in 2008. And Schmidt says to him, Senator, you have to stop watching MSNBC.
And you're saying Obama doesn't watch?
No,
Obama's not always taking the pulse of the public.
He's watching. I know that he's dressed down columnist and he talks about what people are saying. He knows. But I don't think he is pushed and pulled or that worried about. I think if he worries about it, he worries about how the impact of a given column might have on the overarching story. For instance, if when Frank Ridge wrote a column saying the health care bill was terrible, the Obama view is, listen, the right's attacking me, the left's attacking me. This is just going to drown out any open-minded consideration of the bill and of the measure. But so that was kind of, I think, almost reassuring in a way, that he's not driven as much by the things that you and I participate in on a nanosecond by nanosecond basis.
Mm-hmm. And is he fundamentally a calm person? And I mean, is that a reflection of a kind of just calmness?
Everyone around him during the campaign and up to when I did this book always said that he was just a completely cool customer. Mm-hmm. And I found nothing that changed that. I mean, the fact that people I talked to kept telling me other stories of that. Now, he would get heated about things. Mm-hmm. There's this one great story that I like in the book, in which it's during the debt ceiling fight. And remember, they had those series of meetings at the White House where the congressional leaders all came in, mm-hmm. and then they would argue about what had been said or not said afterwards. And in preparation for one of those meetings, Obama said to his top advisors, listen, guys, I have one bottom line now. That is, we're not doing this again in 6 months or a year. I don't care what they say. I don't care what the deal is. I will veto any bill that's a short-term fix. We are not going through this. The founders of this, founders who wrote the Constitution, did not envision a situation in which Congress could hold the president hostage by saying we're going to go bankrupt. This is an insult to the framers. And, he was very serious. And the people around him, and I'm talking about the most senior folks in the White House, they adopted well, we understand your position, sir, type of attitude that those who serve those in power often adopt, but there may come a point in time when you have to do that. And he said, no, no, no. And they all kind of surprised. Now, he wasn't being angry about it, but he was being rather firm, I think in a way that often doesn't sort of come through to the public perception. And I think they all left the meeting saying, well, if we have to, well, we can talk him out of this. Mm-hmm. But as it turned out, that afternoon was when he had this big blow-up with Eric Cantor, and he said, don't call my bluff on this, and he walked out of the meeting.
Now, was that calculated, or was that an actual emotional reaction?
Oh, I don't think that was calculated. I think, but,
And was it in retrospect, it worked? Did it work out well?
Well, I think the White House position is that they won that fight because they got, at the end it came down to whether or not there would be 2, 3, or 4 more of these before the next election, and they held firm, and that was it. Mm-hmm. I think that's a narrow perspective on winning and losing that fight, but I do think it ended up, he ended up getting the public on his side, mm-hmm. and ended up winning. And I think at that point in time, it wasn't sort of like calculated in the sense it was, I might pretend to be angry. I think it was finally, okay, we've done this enough. It's not a bad thing for me to show not just my irritation, but that I am really firm on this. Now, the meeting was ending. It wasn't like he stormed out in the middle of a meeting. It wasn't an emotional, rational moment, mm-hmm. but it was a very firm moment that then, Cantor came out and almost boasted about in a way that seemed kind of childish to me.
Mm-hmm. So Obama did kind of like lose it there, that one moment. I mean,
well, I think losing it is a little is putting it a little too forcefully. I don't think he lost it.
But it wasn't an act.
Yeah, but I don't think he just pretended.
So
go ahead.
On his one reason I'm interested in how calm the guy is and whether he can remain like the calm at the center of the hurricane is you talk about the Bin Laden killing, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I would think if there was anything that was going to make me very nervous as a president, it would have been the hours leading up to that. You've got the famous picture. You got a lot of good pictures in the book, actually, but you got the famous picture of him looking at the, they're watching it on TV. The famous one when Hillary is supposedly aghast, although I don't really think she looks all that aghast. But anyway, Obama himself doesn't exactly look like he's watching Saturday Night Live. I mean, He's,
Well, this is the amazing. I mean, one of his advisors, now, this is coming from an admirer, says that he'd never seen a national security decision of such consequence made with such little drama. Now, that doesn't mean that Obama was at all, casual about this, but he was very deliberative. To me, the stunning thing is that I report in the book, and I know, and the vice president has publicly spoken about this in the last few weeks, that, Gates, Bob Gates, the Secretary of Defense, and Biden both were opposed to going ahead with the operation. And, it wasn't that they were against it totally in principle. There was still some question about whether they were sure bin Laden would be there. So there was an option on the table to wait and collect more intelligence. And not go right away. There were some people in the room, and again, this was a very small, closed circle of people who actually knew about this, much tighter than usual for a national security matter, because they didn't want any word of this actually, obviously.
Understandably.
Yeah, understandably. So there were some who wanted, an attack, an off-site attack from a drone, or, a missile attack, and it was a minority of those who agreed with the helicopter raid as we've come to know it. So imagine this. You're the president, and your top two guys, in a way, the vice president, the defense and the defense secretary, say, don't do this. And it's very clearly stated. And, what happened with Black Hawk Down, and more importantly, with Desert One, with Jimmy Carter. And you know that if this goes poorly, you'll be compared to Jimmy Carter, and you'll be described as a feckless president, who botched this mission, and it probably would seal your fate in terms of your reelection.
And it almost happened with that helicopter going down.
Yes, but also, so you have 79 guys out there, SEALs, who you don't know personally, any of whom could do something by accident. Something could go wrong. It could be that the compound was wired to explode, and somehow it blew up before it could be disabled by the SEAL team. Anything. You can come up with a million different scenarios here.
You could get intercepted by the Pakistani Air Force.
Yes. And yet, you're still able to sort of make a cool and calculated decision. And the last National Security Council meeting on this, prior to that, the CIA had come up, you know how intelligence works. They come up with, with estimations. We say there is a 60 to 80% chance that bin Laden is in this compound. Okay? And they explain why.
Were those the numbers he was given?
Those are the numbers given, 60 to 80%. But then...
No, I'm glad they didn't do a drone strike with those numbers.
Well, wait a second. It gets better or worse. The CIA, before, in the final weeks, had a red team review, in which you get people who have not looked at the intelligence, brought in, who have a fresh perspective, and you give them the intelligence and you say, you come up with your own calculation, your own estimation. And they came up with a lower estimation of 40 to 60% chance. So this, in the last meeting, which is like on the Thursday before the strike, I think it's just a few days before the strike, they give this information to the president. In fact, Mr. President, we've been talking about this for a couple months now. Well, the red team review has a lower chance
50-50
of bin Laden being there. Well, that's what one of the guys in the room said to me. He goes, listen, talking to the president, it seemed to me that he always looked at this as a 50-50 proposition, and that you were never going to get the better, 100% intelligence, that this is what you have to do as a president. They come to you with imperfect intelligence and perfect information, and you just have to make a decision on the basis of that. And I think, and from what other people told me, the president just thought that this was, it was too good a chance, even at 50-50, to let go by.
So there was no nervous rethinking of it when the lower numbers came in?
No, the decision was made within a day or two. It seemed, from what people I talked to there, who were there, it had no impact on his thinking. It didn't, shake him one way or the other. And the other thing is, people, can remember that was the weekend that we had the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which he sort of latched into Donald Trump for having to make difficult decisions like who you should fire, Gary Busey or Meatloaf. And, the raid was originally scheduled to go off that night. It was only because of weather it was postponed today, but you could have had a situation, Bob, when as the president was joking and lacerating Trump, people's cell phones and could have been buzzing and emails and tweets coming in saying something's up. And
and maybe something disastrous could have,
Yes, can you imagine if something
disastrous? He's having a good laugh and everything's going to hell in Pakistan.
Yes, and it was really gutsy. I mean, Valerie Jarrett, one of his closest friends and highest advisors, learned about the raid only that day, that Saturday, and couldn't. It was, how the White House Correspondents' Center, it's the big prom. There are breakfasts and brunches and cocktails all day before the party and then stuff afterwards. She found it hard to bring herself to go to any of those because her stomach was in such knots over all this because she knew what the implications might be. And I saw the president, this isn't in the book, but I saw the president right before he went on the stage. I'm in the White House Correspondents Association. There was a little reception beforehand, and there's a little receiving line. You go up there, and he was, and I had a guest, a fellow named Sean Penn, with me, and the president saw him, and he gave him a big hug and a handshake. How you doing? And he was in the greatest of moods. I love your movies, man. I love your films. You're the greatest actor of our generation. And he was just really animated.
I doubt he wants that publicized, given the number of people he may have said it to. But go ahead.
Yeah, I know, maybe not. But and then I saw him, and there was a long line behind me, and I just said hello, and I said, I'll just tell you one thing: kill out there, which is what you say to a stand-up comic right before they go on the stage. And I didn't realize what. But
he didn't say, you mean in Pakistan?
Yes, he didn't say that. But imagine, so he's doing all this stuff, and it really shows. I thought the decision was a gutsy decision. He was putting his political career on the line. The book shows, and I should mention that we were talking about my book, Showdown, which is out now. But
Showdown shows
that he was very deliberative and careful in the planning, but willing to take, perhaps the ultimate risk.
And do you have any sense for where his calm comes from? I mean, I sometimes in watching him, get the impression that he almost is actually religious. I've seen that kind of self-assurance in people who really believed that God was watching over them, and even that maybe they were, kind of specially ordained.
That's really interesting because I have to say I have no insights into his spiritual life, but this idea of having being supremely confident, and you can see it throughout his career in a lot of the decisions he made, and in fact just in running for president. And what I would wonder, I'd sort of turn the question around here and wonder if you sort of have that attitude in general about your own abilities and your own place in the world, say, whether it's providential or you just feel there's something special about you or there's a special calling you have, and then you become the first black guy to be elected president after being in the Senate 4 years, you have to wonder if that's some form of ratification.
That would tend to affirm the
talk
intuition.
About validating. That's much better than getting your parking ticket validated. I mean, that is just tremendous validation.
Right.
But I will say this, in terms of being confident. I don't have the book doesn't look at a lot of the early year or two. I go into that a tiny bit. It starts with the midterm elections and the lame duck session and what happened after that. It's more about Obama getting his groove back than sort of either losing it or what happened in the first 2 years. And but talking to people, and it seemed to me that he became more confident as the first 2 years went by, particularly when it came to economic matters. In the beginning, particularly on the housing stuff and the mortgage crisis stuff, he'd sit in meetings with Geithner and Summers, and he'd say, "I'm getting letters from people saying they can't get refinancing. What's up with our, our mortgage programs, which were pretty awful by and large, we know now." And they kept saying, everything's fine, and he would kind of accept their thinking. But I think as he went along, and as he saw some, shortcomings in the policies from his own administration that he was signing off on, he became more critical and and perhaps more confident in some of his own judgments on those fronts.
So who are you going to get blowback from on this book? I mean, you want to get blowback from somebody, right? Blowback is good.
It sells books. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
well, the Netroots, do they even still call them the Netroots, by the way?
Well, I think they might. I haven't been at a Netroots
I haven't heard
online.
I guess they're still calling are they still calling that annual thing Netroots?
Yeah, I think they are.
Maybe they changed it from a coast named thing to Net. Yeah. Anyway.
But will
the idealistic left give you blowback? We need to find somebody to give you blowback.
I think there will be people who who've been upset with Obama over whether it's a public option or not pushing harder for some union oriented initiatives. People who don't like the drone strikes, civil libertarians of the world. Who will say that from the left progressive critique. And what I would say is that my book is, as we talked about earlier, is not a defense of Obama, and I'm not saying, and I don't make a pronouncement at the end that he's the greatest progressive president since I don't know anyone, but it's an explanation. So at the end of the day, you, Bob Wright, may still decide that the tax cut deal was a complete sellout by Barack Obama. But if you do so, you'll be doing so as an informed person, rather than someone who just sort of saw the headlines and said, "Oh, Obama," and just bought the narrative that Obama is a weak negotiator who sells out. I don't believe that narrative holds true. But and you still can make a policy argument. Yeah. Why that wasn't a good enough deal, and why it would have policy ramifications down the road. Paul Krugman might do this. Ramifications down the road that are worse, or that to counter any positive impacts that came out of that. And that's a policy argument. But I think if you read the book, you'll see that he doesn't fit the caricature put forward by some of his liberal critics, which is not to say that I disagree with some of their analyses on policy issues. And if you think you should get out of Afghanistan now and things like that, I don't argue with the policies that much. I would like to see a quicker withdrawal out of Afghanistan than there is. But in the book I explained that he actually pushed back against the military and Petraeus and Hillary Clinton and Bob Gates to have a quicker desurging of the surge he ordered than they themselves wanted. Now, real critics of the war will say that's still not good enough. But, I'll leave it to them to have that debate. I don't have a problem with that debate. But up to me, it's really explaining what the president and the people around him were thinking on some of these key actions.
And, I mean, Petraeus had failed to meet the benchmarks he had promised. Well,
yeah,
right?
We could go on and on about Afghanistan, and particularly at this moment in time, it's a very depressing and dark policy discussion, as well as political discussion. I think that people reading this book will understand Obama's thinking about Afghanistan, and they can you can come to your different conclusions about that. But I think giving him a fair hearing on this or on the budget fight or the debt ceiling fight, well, it may not answer people's disappointment if they are disappointed, but at least, as I said earlier, we'll let them be if they're progressives and they're disappointed, be informed in their disappointment, and we'll be able to sort of maybe come up with better arguments for their side and figure out a better sort of relationship with the president in the way that everybody tries to get the interesting thing about presidents is that we in the media, I think people at home, just citizens, activists, people on the Hill, policy people, everybody tries to develop their own relationship with the president by which they try to come to an understanding of who he is, what he cares about, in order to make sense of him and what he does, for good and bad. And I think it's often very difficult to do that, in the immediate scuffle of the moment. And I wrote a couple books on George W. Bush and thought I never really had a handle on the type of person he was. I think, with this book on Obama, I've gotten a little bit more of that. And again, it's not, it's not I don't deeply probe his psyche. That's not what I'm aiming to do, or trying to explain him, the person. I mean, people reflect upon him, people work with him in the book, but ultimately, I'm not interested in, in saying, I've come up with the key to understanding Obama. But I do.
But you want to convey what the world looked like to him during this crucial year, and argue that given the things he saw and given the constraints he was under, he didn't do a bad job of responding.
Well put. Right? You could have written this book.
I should have written this book. It would have taken me longer, though. You're a lot more efficient.
To me, it was really fascinating, and I felt privileged to have the chance, to get that perspective. And I hope I got it accurate and got it right, but to get that perspective and to mull it over just myself, because I found it just so damn interesting. I mean, I've been, like you, a journalist for more than a few years, and often, I get the feeling when we write about things that we're kind of pressing our noses against the window, and clearing, some of the frost or dust or grime to peer in and see something. And because I think we're really motivated just to understand things, and to understand things that aren't on the surface. And I had the chance to do this, and it's the old cliche: if you put yourself in someone else's shoes, you often see things differently. But even if you don't see them differently, you can get a heck of a great story out of it. And so talking to people like and figuring out how Jack Lew, who's now chief of staff, who was head of the OMB, was conducting negotiations on the budget deal, or how Gene Sperling was doing stuff on the debt ceiling. And you imagine, okay, it's very easy for us on the outside to be critical and say, oh, you should be doing this, or you should be doing that. But you sort of understand their perspective, and it sounds, I don't say this as an excuse, but their burdens of responsibility affecting what their decisions are. To me, I thought, I thought it was a good story. I hope it makes a good story. And people.
Yeah. No, and you tell a good story. You're a good. It lends itself to powerful narrative, and you do narrative well. It's very readable. Not just in the sense that your prose, of course, goes down like cotton candy, but I really like the interior design. I mean, it's like a physically readable book. I pay a lot of attention to this, and you should please convey my compliments to the interior designer. It's very well laid out, but above all, your prose makes it go down very smoothly.
And the thing is, I think people can argue with the characters in this book. You can say, okay, this is why Gene Sperling, Jack Lew did this. This is why Biden did that. This is why Hillary Clinton did this other thing, and you can sort of decide for yourself if you would do the same in that circumstance, or if you think they're being weak, or they're being too deferential to political reality. That of course is one of the biggest criticisms of Barack Obama and people who work for him, that sometimes they just they accept the political realities too readily without challenging them. Well, their argument often is, if we challenge them, things blow up, and we pay the price for that. But more importantly, real Americans pay the price for that. So to me, it's just these are some sort of fundamental questions about the intersection of politics, policy, and governing. And it's like I hope people get the sense that you are there. You make, what was that thing they used to do in the NFL games? You make the call, right? Here's the play again in super slow motion. The ref, was there a penalty or not? You make the call, and then we'll tell you whether or not you're right.
There was also a CBS News show called You Were There.
I think so. Maybe it was a newsreel, but something like that. Yeah. So that's what I'm aiming to do, because I didn't want to write an ideological book, or a policy promotion or argumentative book. I wanted to really just sort of understand and explain and share the great stories with the reader.
Yeah, well, it's a great job, and I think the claim you should make is, and I'm willing to go around proclaiming this myself, is that henceforth no person can responsibly criticize Barack Obama without first reading the book Showdown by David Korn. Do you think that's overstating the case, David?
I think that's actually understating the case. I don't think you should be able to say anything about Barack Obama, good or bad.
No person can take another breath without first reading Showdown by David Korn. How's that? Is that all-encompassing enough?
What's the name of that book again?
It's called Showdown by David Korn.
Yeah, we'll put up all the links. But anyway, I will be tweeting and Facebooking all this stuff, and I'm really curious to see how people respond, both good and bad, including those at the White House and people in that world.
It'd be great for them to condemn you.
I know.
Do you think they will? I mean, you don't want them to condemn you on grounds of, well, although I guess factual accuracy is all they would ever condemn you on. Maybe you should even accept that if they do it. But
it's helped sell books in the past. But I mean, listen,
do you want me to condemn you, David? I'd be willing to condemn you.
I think you should go out there right now, and how dare you?
Yeah.
But controversy sells books, but also getting them in the airport bookstores sells books as well. There are a lot of ways to sell books. But as I was saying, we live in this very interactive world now, so I'm sure people will be tweeting and Facebooking at me, and the bloggers will have at it, and I'll be busy responding, which is good.
Yeah, start Twitter. You want Twitter fights about this book.
Yes. Where's Mickey? Mickey! Get Mickey in here.
You might be able to get some blowback from Mickey. I'll work on that.
Yeah, let's get Mickey doing that.
Okay, well, congratulations, David. It's a great accomplishment. It's an ample but not overwhelmingly sized book.
Don't scare off the readers.
And a lot of nice pictures. A lot of pictures.
Yeah,
did you have to track those down yourself?
Oh no, this was the great thing about doing a book on the president is that you can use the White House photographs taken by Pete Souza, who's the wonderful White House photographer, for free. You can't use them for. Interestingly, a fun fact that will not affect many of our viewers out there. You can't use it for the cover of the book because that's considered a commercial use. That you're selling the book with the cover, but you can use it in the way that a news outfit and a media organization can use the White House photographs for the purposes of news and promoting news.
I see the distinction.
So you can, so you can go to the White House Flickr photo stream, and it's just fun to look through them too. For anybody out there who ever wants to use pictures illustrating the White House.
Yeah. So run out and buy it.
Run out and buy it.
And then denounce it on Twitter. That's what we encourage people to do.
Well, thank you, Bob. It's great. I'm glad that you were one of the first people to be able to look at the book.
I feel privileged. And the very first, we think, to interview you about it.
Yes, that may be another blogging.
Yet another blogging hits first. Okay, well, when the storm subsides, although someone once did, as you may know, famously compare the period before your book comes out to the calm before the calm. When the storm, what I'm sure in your case will be a storm subsides, maybe you can come back on Blogging Heads again.
I would love it, and I miss Jim.
Okay, we'll set you two up, and good luck with the book, David.
Okay, thanks,
all right,
Bob.
See you around.